The night air was tense, and Claire, feeling her belly grow larger, struggled to cope with the increasing contractions. The monotonous noise of the car's engine seemed to mock her malaise as Jamie, her husband, drove the car, his haste mirroring her own anxiety. They were on their way to the maternity ward to experience what was to be a happy event, the birth of their firstborn. The glare from the dashboard cast shadows on Jamie's face, whose expression was full of anxiety. Claire, stiff with labor, smiled weakly, trying to hide her pain. Jamie was almost there. There wasn't much left. She whispered it through gritted teeth. He looked up at her, his gaze clouded with an unusual worry. I have to do something first. My sister called. She's in trouble, he said, his voice full of urgency over her problems. Jamie, I'm in labor. We can't stop, she objected sharply. It won't take long. Just wait here. I'll be right back, Jamie retorted. With a squeal of brakes, the car came to a stop at the curb, leaving Claire in a confused and dazed state. Panic gripped her as she realized the gravity of the situation. Jamie, you can't leave me here. We need to be at the hospital, she pleaded, but he had already gotten out of the auto. Sorry, Claire, I'll be quick, he said and slammed the door shut, leaving her alone in the dark, lonely and in pain. Claire frantically tried to call her sister. Please don't do this, she whispered into the phone, but the call went unanswered. The feeling of loneliness grew stronger as Jamie's figure vanished into the night. Her agony intensified. She clutched her stomach, and the pain mixed with a sense of betrayal. This can't be happening, she told herself, realizing the criticality of what was happening in the cold night air. Claire's relationship with her sister-in-law, Melissa, had always been strained. Melissa was often on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and recent events had only exacerbated their relationship. Melissa's caprices were like unpredictable storms leaving chaos in their wake. While Claire was recovering from the traumatic night, Melissa's demands took an unexpected turn. She stormed into Claire's house. She possessed an aura of unwavering dignity. Claire, darling, you look amazing, especially for a newly turned mother, Melissa muttered with a smile that barely covered her true intentions. Claire, still stunned by Jamie's sudden departure, made an effort and smiled back politely. What brings you here, Melissa? She asked. Oh, I need a little favor, Melissa replied indifferently, playing with a lock of her hair. Can you believe it? I didn't have time to purchase the exclusive merch from the concert, and now I found this unique photo online. For only $300, she explained. Claire's eyes widened in surprise. Melissa, I'm going through a difficult time. I can't spend $300 on a picture right now, especially since I just had a baby. Melissa's face narrowed in response, and she said, Claire, don't be selfish. I cut my hours at work to make it to that concert, and now it's the least you can do for me. After all, we are a family and we should support each other, shouldn't we, Claire? Feeling pressured, Claire sighed. Okay, I'll do it once, but I can't go on living like this anymore, Melissa. I have my own family and my own responsibilities now. Melissa smiled triumphantly. That's just fine, Claire. You're such a cutie. I knew you wouldn't say no. And don't worry, the picture will take care of everything. You won't regret it. When Melissa left, Claire was left alone with bitterness surging in her soul. A dangerous precedent had been set, and she realized that Melissa's demands would not end there. In a moment of vulnerability, Claire decided to confide in her best friend. It's like I'm trapped, Sarah. Melissa is using me, and I can't even catch my breath, Claire shared with her friend. Sarah responding with sympathy. You need to set boundaries, Claire. This can't go on like this. You deserve so much more. Claire nodded in agreement. determined to regain control of her own life and protect her newborn son from the harmful influences that threatened them both. The contractions grew stronger in the silence of the hospital room, blasted by the cold air. Claire cradled her newborn son and felt the inner turmoil as she remembered how alone she had been when Jamie had left her on the side of the road. Ill memories of the night she'd been abandoned mingled with the sounds of the delivery room, the beeping of the monitors, the quiet conversations of the nursing staff, and Claire's labored. The nurses, moving with professional confidence, encouraged her, but their words couldn't fill the void of Jamie's absence. "You're going to make it, Claire. Just a little more," one of them assured her as the pain grew more intense, and Claire's thoughts oscillated between physical agony and emotional turmoil. She remembered Jamie leaving her alone with the trouble. "You're strong, Claire." Another nurse intervened, trying to bring her back to reality. The last pushing breath brought relief and sadness at the same time. The baby's cries cut through the silence, announcing the beginning of a new life. Claire cradled her son in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks as the nurses cared for them both. Triumph and loneliness mingled in her heart. In the silence that followed, Claire's phone rang with Jamie's missed calls. Doubtingly, she picked up the phone, tiredness and frustration audible in her voice. "Jamie, our son has been born. Where were you when I needed you so much?" His reply sounded like a clumsy attempt to justify himself. "Claire, I had some important matters to attend to. I didn't think it would happen so fast. How's our baby? Is everything okay?" Jamie said, trying to ease the tension of the conversation. Claire, whose maternal senses were fully awakened, replied with disappointment mixed with firmness, "The baby's fine. But Jamie, you can't disappear in difficult moments. We need to work together as a team." His words, seemingly empty and devoid of sincerity, echoed long in the sterile space of the hospital room. "I'll be there soon." Claire, however, could no longer trust his promises. Minutes stretched into hours as she held her newborn son. In the silence of the hospital room, she made a silent promise to protect her child from the shadows of the past. In the days following the tumultuous labor, Claire reflected on her tortured marriage. The hospital room that had become a refuge for her and her baby was filled with the weight of unspoken words and unresolved feelings. The past haunted her, and Jamie's absence during labor became a symbol of the fracture in their relationship. Holding her son in her arms, Claire pondered their relationship. How did we get here? Her gaze lingered on the baby's small face, whose innocence contrasted sharply with the storm of their marriage. When Jamie finally arrived at the hospital, his gaze met Claire's with a look that read a mixture of guilt and confusion. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I didn't realize the gravity of the situation," he mumbled weakly, trying to bridge the gap created by his inattention. Tiredness and frustration showed on Claire's face. "Jamie, you left me alone at the most crucial moment. This isn't just about labor, it's about us as a couple. Where were you when I needed you?" His apology, lacking the depth of sincere remorse, hung in the air. "I had to figure something out right away. I didn't think it would happen so quickly. Can we forget it?" he asked, but his words lost weight in the face of her vulnerability. The chamber was filled with emotional tension and unspoken truths hung in the air. Claire's voice, a mix of anger and resignation, cut through the silence. "Jamie, I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Our marriage is crumbling and I'm not sure it can be saved," she said. Her words, full of gravity, hung between them as Jamie tried to grasp the full scope of the tragedy. "Claire, we have a child now. We have to try to get through this together." "I can do it," he pleaded, his voice reverberating off the walls as his desperation echoed. "Claire, determined to protect her son from their tumultuous relationship, replied with unrelenting determination, "I need time, Jamie. Time to decide what's best for both of us." That hard conversation was the turning point in their disintegrating relationship as Jamie left the room, and as the door closing behind him left Claire alone with her thoughts. It became clear how fragile their bond had been, and a frightening path to the future opened up before her. She prepared herself for the difficulties of life the atmosphere in the lawyer's office, where the terms of the divorce were being discussed, was as sterile and cold as the relationship between Claire and Jamie. They sat across from each other at a gleaming mahogany desk, and the tension between them was palpable. The lawyer who had witnessed and mediated their breakup looked at Claire sympathetically. "Let's try to keep calm. Claire, please share your concerns," he asked, feeling the emotional weight she carried. Claire, pulling herself together, but feeling vulnerable, began to speak with restraint but confidence. "I can't forget Jamie leaving me alone at the most critical moment. And it's not just about that night, it's about the neglect of our family. I can't trust him as a partner anymore," Claire stated with conviction. Jamie, trying to defend his position, but striving to remain calm, countered, "I couldn't have predicted it would have such consequences. The important thing is that our son is healthy. Can't we focus on that?" The lawyer stepped in, seeking to steer the discussion away from emotional statements. "Claire, do you have specific demands regarding child custody and financial support?" Claire's gaze crossed with Jamie's, her voice firm and unwavering. "I want the best for our son. I will be the primary caregiver. And Jamie, you have to contribute financially. This isn't just about us." Jamie's face contorted with disappointment. "Claire, I can't believe you're doing this. We could have overcome this together. Why are you making this so difficult?" The lawyer, sensing the rising tension, intervened again. "Both sides need to be reasonable. Claire is demanding what she thinks. Jamie, think about the long-term welfare of your child." As negotiations continued, the harsh reality of their divorce became increasingly apparent. The lawyer, remaining neutral but skillfully maneuvered between the turbulent emotions and the practicalities of the situation. Claire's determination to protect her son clashed with Jamie's unwillingness to recognize the consequences of his actions. The court hearing, although formal in nature, was a reflection of the emotional storms that defined their relationship. Claire was preparing for life as a single mother, and Jamie was facing the imminent reality of being absent from her family. At the conclusion of their negotiations, Claire and Jamie walked out of the attorney's office, slamming the door behind them. A chapter of their life together was closing, leaving the blurry marks of their separation in the light. Every step Claire took forward echoed the past as she and Jamie made plans for the future together. Divorce had left her alone with the reality of raising her son alone, but determination lived in her heart. She was ready to build a new life for herself and her child with the support of her parents, who helped her navigate the legal and financial aspects of separate parenting. Closing a chapter of her life with Jamie, Claire opened a new one full of uncertainty, but also opportunity. At home, over a cup of comforting tea, she told her mother of her plans to return to teaching to support herself and her son, and to be an example of strength and independence to him. Her mother, always a steadying pillar, approved of her decision, confirming that Claire had always had the necessary resilience and that her students, as well as her son, would be happy to have her in their lives. Encouraged by her family's support, Claire began to take the first steps toward returning to a profession that brought her joy and fulfillment. Her friends, including close friend Sarah, affirmed her belief that this new beginning would be a chance for personal growth and fulfillment. In a deep and candid conversation with Sarah, Claire shared her desire for her son to realize that he was capable of overcoming any obstacle and that the circumstances of his birth would not determine his future. She was willing to be both mother and father to him and guide him through life. Sarah, always a source of wisdom and comfort, confirmed to Claire that she was stronger than she imagined and that her son would be fine because he had a mother like her. Claire was more than just a mother. She was the architect of her son's future, striving to raise him to be a resilient individual. All of her decisions and actions were for the benefit of the baby, and she worked hard to create a stable and loving environment for him. Conversations with her attorney, once filled with the tension of divorce, now focused on financial security and creating a supportive environment for her son. In these conversations, Claire looked for ways to find stability so that her child could grow up, surrounded by love and care. In her apartment, where every item was chosen with care and love, Claire set up a cozy nursery. Holding her son in her arms, she whispered to him about a future in which they would explore the world together, promising him that they would always be each other's rock. Now that the divorce papers were signed and the past began to recede, Claire felt a new chapter of her life beginning. She had left behind the weight of her past experiences, making room for a future filled with comfort. Claire's life was built on a delicate balance between caring for her child and rebuilding her own life. Echoes of laughter and baby sounds filled her apartment, creating an atmosphere of healing and new beginning. One evening, as Claire was rocking her son, her mother came into the room and said, "You're doing an incredible job, Claire. I've never seen a stronger mother." Her words were full of pride and love. Claire's smile was the answer, gratitude and wariness intertwined. "It's not easy, Mom, but he's worth it. We'll be fine," she replied with confidence, knowing there was a lot of work ahead of her, but she was ready for it for her son's sake. Claire sat at her desk in rare moments of solitude, reflecting on the paths that had led her to today. Nearby was a photograph of her son smiling for the first time, a bright ray of light in the fog of past adversity. "We're writing our own story, little one," she whispered, looking at his image. Returning to teaching was an upcoming chapter of her life, and the support of friends, as always, was invaluable. Sarah, her best friend, encouraged, "You've turned the page, Claire. I look forward to seeing what amazing things you and your son accomplish together." However, during this time of new beginnings, Claire received an unexpected letter from Jamie, who expressed regret and a desire to be a part of their son's life. Despite acknowledging his feelings, Claire remained steadfast in her priorities, the stability and well-being of her son. Discussing the situation with her attorney, she was firm. If Jamie really wants to be involved, it has to happen in a way that promotes our son's happiness and safety. Returning to teaching turned out to be not just a job for Claire, but a restoration of her own self, a symbol of independence and strength. Standing in front of her class, she felt she had found new purpose and meaning. "Life is full of unexpected twists and turns," she told her student, "but it's how we respond to those twists and turns that defines us." Claire walks with her son through the park, where the setting sun casts a warm glow on their faces. Looking at her son, she whispers, "Here's to new beginnings, my love."